The Capitals lost to the Red Wings and they made some roster cuts on Sunday. What does that mean for the Capitals? We'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. The Caps season will be starting here soon, and I would love to talk Caps hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Episode of Locked On Capitals, we talk about battles at the blue line position. As we know, the Caps picked up Joel Edmundson in the offseason, and we thought everything was kind of laid out in front of us, and then Joel Edmundson got injured. What does that mean for some young Caps on the blue line? We'll talk about that in the show. A little bit later, we will talk about roster cuts that were made Saturday and Sunday and what that means for the Capitals. But just to get it going here, the Caps did, in fact, fall to the Red Wings. And, I've always talked about that on the show, is that it's not necessarily about the box score, but the Red Wings do pick up the dub, and then 5-2. It was a game that had some high points. It was some low points. It was definitely not like the upper echelon players. I mean, there were some, like Dylan Strome and other players out there, but this wasn't your Ovechkin and Backstrom, that kind of thing. But it was still a good game as far as assessment is concerned, and who really jumped off the page. One of the players in particular is Häman Aktell. It was one of the things, when we talked about the blue line and who's going to end up being on the blue line and who isn't, there was a lot of questions, but Hardy did really pop off the page. Like I said, with Joel Edmundson missing 4 to 6 weeks, there is going to be a battle. And I'll go into depth a little bit more later in the show about that battle. But he really kind of jumped out off the page. He's 6'3", 198 pounds. And he is making a case for his spot on the Capitals. As again, they're looking to fill holes in the roster for the next 4 to 6 weeks. I'm not saying that these players are necessarily going to be on the roster for the remainder of the season, but in any event, he did log in at 20 minutes of ice time. So he was getting his work in, and that's one of the things that they're looking for, is to plug those holes around the lineup. I mean, it's not necessarily easy. We talked about Alexiev. We talked about Vinny Iorio. Who is ultimately going to be? That's going to be an interesting question. Another player that is really making his case is Matthew Phillips. In the game, he had 1 goal, 1 assist, and logged 18-25. For forward. So he did log in some time, and he was one of the players that Jeff Merrick talked about. Kind of a surprising thing. We know he came over from the Calgary team, the Wranglers, and he has, when he's come here, he's performed. And then you just take a look at the box score from yesterday. It was a game that the Capitals didn't pick up a win, but like I said, it's all about assessment at this point. And 1 goal, 1 assist, 18-25. Not too bad. So why does that pop out? Why is that even noteworthy? Given the fact that Anthony Mantha's on the lineup. And let's face it, he hasn't really jumped off the page in preseason. I know he put in the work in the offseason, and he dropped 10 pounds, and he hired the mental coach. But as it stands right now, if I'm going to make a decision between Ivan Miroshnichenko, if I am going to make a decision between Matthew Phillips, it's going to be a difficult position to make. And I know that there are still some preseason games that are left to be played. And I know that Anthony Mantha got in a fight in the last game. I think, he knew he wasn't having a great game. So he's like, what am I going to do to have to be noticeable. And one of the things that he has in his skill set, Anthony Mantha, that is his size. When he's skating in top form, he's also a skater. He's got a good shot. He's got a nice release, that kind of thing. But it's not consistent and it's not sustainable. So it's going to be interesting. And I think there are going to be some tough decisions for the Caps to make here. And and I'll talk about in the next segment, just based on roster cuts. Ivan Miroshnichenko is still here. Conor McMichael is still here. I'm not saying Miroshnichenko is going to break camp with the team, but I would not be surprised. I do think that, does he have some work to do? Of course, I think he does. But it's the players that are playing. And I know what people are going to say is that Anthony Mantha is under contract. What are you going to do with him? That I don't know. Buy him out, try to trade him again, I guess, if you can. I know that would be a lot of money to have on the bench as an interesting thing. Spencer Carberry talked about it. He explained that the competition role in Ford is still up in the air right now. And, just don't draw any conclusions that because, this was the lineup that you saw last year, that necessarily that is going to be the lineup this coming season. And I think that, when it comes to Phillips, he is trying to make a name for himself. He's 5'8", so he's got some pretty good size. Again, he got a power play assist and he got a goal there. So there's not a whole lot more that you could ask for him in the game. As we know, he signed that 1-year deal with the Caps following an all-star year with the AHL's Calgary Wranglers. And he is looking for an opportunity. Does he have an opportunity on this team? And ultimately, where would he fit? I guess that remains to be seen. How is he going to play in the other games that he is assigned to? Other players that have stood out were Ethan Frank. We remember what he did last year as well with the with the Hershey Bears. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be ready for next season, but he is someone that kind of popped off the page. And another player, if you're a longtime Capitals fan, if you're an everydayer, I've talked about him, is Hendrix Lapierre. What are some of the things that we know about Hendrix Lapierre from last year? Kind of an up and down season. And he was a healthy scratch there for a while, but then he kind of found his way and helped the Bears in their push for the Calder Cup. His resume got that much better with a Calder Cup victory on it. So again, and that's one of the things that Brian McClellan spoke about, is he said, well, what about Hendrix Lapierre? What about Beck Malmstein? What about Conor McMichael? And he goes, I think there's a spot for all of them. That's not going to be the case unless there's some sort of injury or something. One of the things that was he burst speed, he and he had, he was involved in score opportunities out there. He was always involved in the play, as well as Alexi Protas. He generated some good chances. Other players that stood out, of course, were Strome and Milano. And, just taking a look at Strome, we know he signed that new deal, and that's already paying off, isn't it? It's really kind of showing that, he is as advertised. 1 goal, 1 assist, and 20 minutes and 12 seconds of ice time. So he led the forward group in ice time. And, Dylan Strome is one of those players that the Capitals picked up initially when he first came here. And I think that they thought he was going to be pretty good. I didn't think a lot of Caps fans or even, Brian McClellan himself, I don't think that he necessarily thought he was going to be that great. But Dylan Strome has definitely been a good acquisition, as well as Sonny Milano, who got an assist with 19:06 of ice time as well. The tough thing out there is I think that Alexi Protas is going to be one of those guys that's going to be kind of in flux here as well. He made the big team last year. He played so well in camp last year that he broke camp with the team. But if you're asking me right now, and I'm going to pretend that you are, because I can't hear you right now, is who is going to make the team from that group that we were talking about? Knee-jerk reaction of the forwards. Who is it going to be? It's going to be Ivan Miroshnichenko, and it is going to be Conor McMichael and Beck Malmstein. And, and I don't know how they're all fit in there, but those are 3 forwards that really just jump out. I don't think this is going to be the year for Anthony Mantha. And I want to say I'm happy with the work that he put in, and hats off that he tried to do everything that he could possibly do to get himself right. He just hasn't pop the paper. In a contract year coming up here, kind of a lame duck thing going on, you really need to impress, not just for your future with your club, but for your future in the National League. He has been in the National Hockey League for quite some time. He just doesn't necessarily strike me as a guy that's going to accept getting sent down to the AHL. I think that he'd almost consider retiring if that was the case. Just for the biggest reason, I think that if he got sent down to the AHL, I don't think he would get called up again. And again, this is bash on Anthony Mantha. It's just that he's not there. There is a younger core of players that has come along and proven their worth more than he has. And I know that there are some preseason games left to play, and he was kind of grasping at straws, trying physical in that last game, trying to endear himself, is that he has some sort of intrinsic value. But knee-jerk reaction, just based on what I've seen, that is who it's going to be. It's going to be the year for Conor McMichael. Ivan Miroshnichenko is going to be on the team, and I think Beck Mallon finds a spot. I'm so sure Protas does. And I'm here to say that. I mean, like I talked about bursts of speed there, and he got involved in some plays there. But again, you want the best of the best on the team. You don't want him on here because of former glory. It's what have you done for me lately? And Protas has looked okay. He doesn't pop, but I think that, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because Miroshnichenko hasn't played in games. It's just that one game that he really stood out. Is that sustainable? And here, touche. I hear that. But Conor McMichael has looked good, and I think that Beck Mallenstein fits that stereotypical, prototypical fourth liner that the Capitals are looking for, that tough guy, that rugged guy that's going to fit in on the lineup there. So that's just my prediction based on what I have seen. And, going forward, I could be wrong. Maybe, Ivan Miroshnichenko falls off a cliff and he wasn't quite the player that I thought. I don't think that's going to be the case. Conor McMichael put in the work last season. He seems really dialed in. And, part of Beck Mallenstein's game is his thighs. Sometimes you have to draw from the strength you have. So then, just talking about it, earlier in the segment here, I was talking about Phillips. That's a possibility as well, so I guess I'm going to put him as a possibility as well. There is still a lot to be determined. I'll be able to give you a more accurate answer, but I want to stick with the three that I think that, I don't know if Phillips is sustainable. I saw glimpses of greatness. He played really well in the last game, but still for me, I think that the three players that I mentioned there, I think are poised for really great things for the Capitals. And I guess it's going to be a wait and see thing, but sometimes in the show you get asked for just, blank answers. And if I'm going to give you, those are the three players of forwards, that I think are ready to make the. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about roster cuts that were made on Sunday. What does that mean? And what really kind of surprised me? I'll talk about that coming up. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is what also keeps you ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcast. And the Capitals season is starting. We're in the preseason, but the regular season is going to be starting here soon, and I have got you guys covered. So subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about roster cuts to this team and what that means for the team. So I did post a short on this a little bit earlier. I guess this is going to be Monday morning when you're watching this. So on Sunday, I posted a short. They talked about some players that were cut, and two players that are a bit surprising, if you will, is Chase Priskie and Riley Sutter. Chase Priskie in particular, I have heard quite a bit of buzz about him that, maybe he is going to find a roster spot. But as it turns out, he got cut in hopes of getting assigned to Hershey. The problem, however, with those two players that I mentioned is they have to clear the waiver wire. And if you look at historically, sometimes the Capitals have lost players from doing this. If you think back to Brett Leeson, for example, that's just off the top of my head. We know that he went out to the Anaheim Ducks. Sometimes, these players, your good intention is to just put them on the waiver wire and they're going to get sent down. Not only the case, Washington then assigned forwards Pierre Dubé, Ethan Frank, Ryan Hoffer, Henrik Rabinski, Alexander Suzdalev, and Bogdan Triniev. Also goaltenders Garen Bjorklund and Mitchell Gibson. One of the interesting things for me, and I'm going to have to kind of sit back and think on this one, or maybe it's going to be made apparent, is that Hunter Shepard is still on the big team. What is that all about? We do know that we have Darcy Kemper at number 1, Charlie Lindgren at number 2, and Hunter Shepard at number 3. And if you're in every area of the show, you know that last month they had a viable option at number 2 goalie if they wanted to trade Charlie Lindgren. Is there a possibility that the Capitals think that they have something in Hunter Shepard and that potentially that Charlie Lindgren could be an expendable piece? And I'm not here to bat Lindgren. I actually think he's quite a heck of a goalie, but they do have a really great in Hunter Shepard. He could ultimately be the backup goalie for the Capitals. I do believe that. And what are people going to say right off the bat? They're going to say, didn't you see that he got a loss yesterday? Of course, it was playing in front of him. He was the in the Calder Cup push there. So, and it's one of the again, I guess we'll and wait and see what's behind that. Maybe there's just a roster spot available, but why would the Cap keep him around if in fact that they have Darcy Kemper and they have Charlie Lindgren? Is there an underlying injury with one of those other goalies that I mentioned? I guess we're going to have to kind of wait and see. But those roster cuts are a bit difficult. Again, things to sort of keep an eye on, and I will keep you guys covered, is Chase Priskie and Riley Sutter having to clear the waiver wire. There are other other teams out there that have needs as well. Is there the potential that they could get scooped up? So noticeable about who is still on the team, of course, we have Phillips, we have Beck Malenstein, Conor McMichael, Joe Snively, Alexi Protas, and Hendrix Lapierre. So that's going to be interesting. Those are the notable ones out there. Of course, then there's Häman Aktell as well. There's just going to try to give these players the benefit of the doubt and see if they are able to find a spot. I think that at the end of the day, they ultimately want the best players on the team. The Washington's roster is now at 35. So yeah, it's Hardy, Häman Aktell, Vincent Iorio, Hendrix Lapierre, Miroshnichenko. Those are the intriguing names. The cuts have to be made by October 9th at 5 p.m. Eastern. So it's going to be interesting to see who ends up making the team. But I think that ultimately with Häman Aktell, they're trying to see if he has what it takes to be on the blue line. To be honest with you, he is one of the players that I really have circled as being in on the comp. Alexiev, that is going to be Vinny Iorio, Lucas Johansson. And it very well might be, but it's going to be interesting. I think that the Capitals like his size, and he has made the most of his opportunities. And what is one of the things that I talk about in this show is always making the most of your opportunities. And I think that they feel like that he has done that. And again, 6'3", 198 pounds. That is quite a guy. He operated on that third pairing with Dylan McElrath. So another guy that has a bit of size to his game. How is that going to translate, and who's ultimately going to make the big team, and how many of those players will stick around and be the seven? At some point, Joel Edmondson is going to come back. But is it going to be a position that one of those players, did they potentially so well that they're not going to have a spot for Joel Edmonds in particular was that Tom Wilson said that he's for a big guy. He can space in a. He's like around 6'4", 6'5", 230 pounds, huge. But we know underlying back. So kind of the thing. But you want the most qualified on the team. I think that oftentimes when you follow, you kind of start, rooting for one player. Like Conor McMichael, it's got to be Conor McMichael. And I maybe fall into that, but usually when I, make an opinion on something like this, it's based on what I say. Again, it's a small sample set. As more preseason fan out here, opinions could change. Maybe Anthony Mantha is going to get set on fire, and he's played really well. But as of right now, those were the roster cuts that were made. Nothing too surprising except and the Priskie thing. And I guess also that Hunter Shepard is up here as well. But it is going to be interesting to, how all of this pans out as well. I want to hear from you guys on Twitter at DanCaps218 at Locked On Caps. Did the Caps make the right decisions in the roster cuts that they made to make the team? It's going to be interesting to see what happens. There's a lot at stake. Capitals missed the playoffs for the first time since 2014. They have their sights set on playoffs at a minimum this year. Again, I don't think that there's any goal as of right now of winning a Stanley Cup, but I think that stranger things happen. I guess we'll have to kind of keep our eyes on it and wait and see. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about the battles at the blue line. It seems to be heating up there, like I talked about in this segment. Before it was, thought to be Alexiev or Lucas Johansson, but there are certain players that are making it interesting. Who am I talking about? We'll discuss next. Our next partner here is AG1. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Covering my nutritional basis for the day literally could be easier, which is why I trust AG1. Just scoop with water and drink it first each morning, and it's done. I also like that it costs less than $3 a day, if you ask me. It's a really effective daily habit with a high-quality soy ingredient. It's a win-win. So once again, go drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So some interesting questions abound on the Capitals blue line. Who's going to be the 7th defenseman? Who's going to fill in for Joel Edmondson in his absence? And, there's another thing out there is Jensen has missed some time with a personal issue. What is the nature of that? We ultimately don't know at this point. All we do know is that he is missing some time due to a personal issue. Who is going to make the team? So one of the players that has been hanging out here is Häman Aktell. Again, we know Joel Edmondson is going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, and the Capitals want to have a long look at Aktell. Potentially that he is going to be one of the guys that fills the spot there. And, when I have seen him out there playing, I think that he has played pretty good, all things considered. But I do want to see what, the other blue liners have. What is Vinny Iorio going to look like? Lucas Johansson seems to be getting some more buzz as well. But if we do look at Häman Aktell on the blue line, he played at 20-33. So he did log some decent minutes out there. Also out there, Alexander Alexiev 22-16 and Martin Faravari 20-18. So they did get a nice long look at a lot of the players out there, and it's going to be a tough decision for them to make on who makes the team. If you take a look, last season, at the time, John Carlson was the only blue liner under contract, and then subsequently, you take a look at Trevor Van Riemsdyk, you take a look at Jensen, Faravari, Alexiev, got new deals. So it seemed like everything was pretty ironed out. And before Joel Edmondson came here, it seemed pretty well set that this was going to be the year for Alex Alexiev. But then all of a sudden, what happened on free agency is that Brian McClellan signed Joel Edmondson. Why? I think in part because the Habs retained 50% of his salary. Some pretty good bargain shopping, if you ask me, right? And I think that was ultimately why they did that. And they also know that this team was ravaged by injuries last year. And, injuries happen, every single year. And if you take a look at it, there was already that hiccup with TVR, right? So there are a lot of questions on who is ultimately going to make the big team. And if we could learn any lesson from last year, it's about having that needed depth. We also know that, remember when John Carlson missed a substantial amount of time and what that meant for the Capitals, and how Gustafsson really kind of stepped up and filled a role, ate up a lot of minutes for a lot of time while he was here. So I think that you can't have too much depth. And the thing for the Capitals, as they seem to have a lot of options on the blue line, are they all NHL ready options? I guess that remains to be seen, but this is what preseason is about. It's about assessing talent and who is going to be the cream that rises to the top. And I think that, even before Joel Edmondson was here, I thought the Capitals were in a pretty good position on the blue line. So subtract him, I don't think that really changes a whole lot. I think that if they find, what the best player, the best blue liner out there to fill that, then the Capitals will be. They were okay before they signed Joel Edmondson. It's not like he was this all-star, blue liner came here and just set the world afire. I mean, he was a good pickup, don't get me wrong, but I think that the Capitals were in a pretty good position before that. So there's no reason to push the panic button. It is going to be interesting to see ultimately who gets picked. Again, when you do this show, you kind of pick favorites. And for the longest time, I thought it could be, Vinny Iorio, or I thought it could be Alexander Alexiev. But now I'm hearing rumblings about Lucas Johansson and also Häman Aktell. So it's going to be interesting. And that is why I have you guys covered. And I'll keep you updated with everything that's going on as we see more and more moves taking place. Who's going to break the team? And, just because these players make it, to the roster on game one does not necessarily mean they're going to be on the team for the duration of the season. We've seen this before with McMichael and LaPierre, like, whoa, we broke camp, they're on the team. And then all of a sudden they're a healthy scratch, and then they get reassigned back down to Hershey. So it is important not to read too much into it. Is it a victory if they make the opening night roster? Of course, but it's not etched in stone that they will be on there in the final game of the season either. So I do think that changes will be made. Even if they pick a player to break camp with the team, they're going to have to perform. And if not, they could get traded. They could get sent down. So those are the storylines to follow. Big things to circle, of course, is what's going to happen with Anthony Mantha. What other roster cuts are going to take place? What is ultimately behind Hunter Shepard still being on this team? I have got you guys covered the rest of the way. All right, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And are you a fan of other DC sports? Well, Locked On has got you covered. We have Locked On Nationals, Commanders, and Wizards. So no matter what major DC sport it is, Locked On has got you covered. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.